So let's talk about something you've probably heard of, cannabidiol, or CBD. But we're going to look at it in a way you might not expect, as a potential new weapon in the fight against cancer. We're going to dive into the hard science and see how modern research is taking this ancient plant and putting it into a very, very new battle.
I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It's what's driving this whole wave of new research. Cannabis has been used in medicine for thousands of years, but it's only right now that we have the tools to really break it down and see if its parts can take on one of our biggest enemies. Okay, first things first, let's get one thing crystal clear. When people hear cannabis, they usually think of THC. That's the stuff that's psychoactive, the part that causes the high. But that's not what we're talking about today, at all. Our focus is entirely on its cousin, CBD, which is non-psychoactive, no high. And that fundamental difference is exactly why scientists are so interested in its therapeutic potential, completely separate from any kind of intoxicating effect.
All right, so now that we're all on the same page, we're talking about CBD, not THC. Let's get into how this ancient plant is stepping into this very modern fight.
You see, CBD isn't some brand new mysterious compound. It's actually a pretty well-known player in medicine. We already know it has powerful anti-inflammatory and antioxidant properties. It's even an approved treatment for certain types of epilepsy. So with that kind of track record, researchers started asking the next, much bigger question. Could we maybe harness those same abilities to fight tumors?
And that brings us to the really cool part, the nitty-gritty. How might CBD actually work against cancer on a biological level? Let's zoom way in, right inside the cell, to see what the research is showing us.
Think of this as CBD's battle plan. The first thing you notice is that this doesn't seem to be a one-trick pony. The early lab research suggests it launches this coordinated, multi-pronged attack. And it's not just on one type of cancer. We're seeing these effects in lab models for a whole range of them. Brain, breast, colorectal, lung, you name it.
So let's focus on one of those key tactics, which is just fascinating.
It's basically convincing a cancer cell to commit suicide, a process called apoptosis. Now, this is a really clever strategy because instead of trying to poison the cell from the outside, like some chemotherapies do, CBD appears to hijack the cancer cell's own internal programming and flip its self-destruct switch, all while hopefully leaving healthy cells alone. So how does that actually pull this off? Well, in the lab, it looks like a chain reaction. First, CBD floods the cancer cell with these destructive little molecules called reactive oxygen species. This creates a ton of internal stress, which then damages the cell's powerhouses, the mitochondria. That damage then activates a team of executioner proteins called casposes, and they're the ones that carry out the final self-destruct order. It's a pretty elegant and brutal process. But look, taking out cancer cells is really only half the battle. You also have to stop the cancer from spreading to other parts of the body, what's known as metastasis. That's just as critical. And this is another area where CBD is showing some early promise. It seems to get in the way of the signals that cancer cells use to break away, travel, and set up shop in new territory. To put it simply, in these lab models, CBD seems to put the brakes on the very things that make cancer so dangerous. It cuts back on the enzymes that cancer uses to chew through tissue, and it dials down the proteins that basically give it the green light to go exploring. So the takeaway here is, it's not just about killing the tumor, it's about trying to build a cage around it.
All right, so we've seen how CBD might work in a lab setting. Now let's talk about where this research is being focused. Which specific cancers are showing the most promise in these early stage studies?
Let's start with one of the absolute toughest fights in oncology, glioblastoma, a really aggressive brain tumor. What's interesting here is that in the lab, CBD doesn't just work on its own. It actually seems to make the cancer cells more sensitive to standard treatments like radiation and chemo, acting like an ally to make those treatments even more effective. We see a similar story in breast cancer research, especially in the triple-negative type, which can be very hard to treat. Again, lab studies show CBD triggering that cell suicide we talked about, and in animal models, this has been linked to real reductions in both the size of the tumor and its ability to spread.
Now, for colorectal cancer, the research points to a very specific target. CBD appears to shut down a signaling pathway called WNT/beta-catenin. The easiest way to think about this pathway is like a stuck gas pedal that's making the cancer grow and spread uncontrollably. CBD seems to help take the foot off that pedal.
And finally, with lung cancer studies, it's like we see a combination of all these strategies rolled into one. It appears to slow growth, force cell death, and in some animal models, even choke off the tumor's blood supply, essentially trying to starve it out.
Okay, I know, all of this preclinical data sounds incredibly exciting, but, and this is a really big but, we have to be clear-eyed and realistic about the long, difficult road from a cool discovery in a lab to a proven treatment that helps patients in a clinic. So let's talk about the major hurdles that are still ahead.
This is probably the question on your mind right now, right? If the science is pointing in such a promising direction, why can't you get CBD as a cancer treatment? Well, the answer is that the journey from the lab to the pharmacy is massive, complex, and full of challenges. One of the first huge hurdles is something called bioavailability. It's a fancy word for a simple problem: actually getting enough of the CBD to the part of your body where it needs to work. Get this, if you take CBD orally, like in a capsule, only about 6% of it actually makes it into your bloodstream. Your liver filters out almost all the rest. So just figuring out how to deliver a reliable, effective dose to a tumor is a massive challenge in itself. And honestly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. Scientists still need to figure out the exact right dose for every different type of cancer. They have to study how CBD might interact with other chemo drugs. You don't want it making another treatment less effective. And you have to remember that every single person's tumor is unique. To figure all this out, you need large, expensive, and very long human clinical trials. And that brings us to the most important takeaway of all. This quote from the source paper really says it all. Current evidence relies predominantly on preclinical models. What that means is, everything we've talked about so far happened either in a petri dish or in animals. And while that's an absolutely critical first step, it is no guarantee that we'll see the same results in people. So where does that leave us? Well, we're at the very beginning of a really fascinating scientific journey. The potential in the lab is clear, and it's exciting. But the road from that lab bench to a patient's bedside is incredibly long and filled with challenges. The quest to see if this ancient compound can truly become a new pillar in modern cancer therapy is underway. But the final answer? That will only come through years of careful, rigorous science.